Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this special Veterans webinar with stars of stage and screen of security with a variety of background and very special guests in the form of Caitlin, Bridget and Herb. And we're going to be talking about the power of veterans in business, whether your hidden superpower, and for veterans listening to this who already know that you have superpowers, we're going to talk a little bit more about what you can do to get business to recognise the values you bring and the very unique and often misunderstood values of veterans. So I said we have an expert panel with us who are far more interested than I am, which is why we get them along. I'll get each of them to introduce themselves in turn. So Caitlin, if you wouldn't mind going first, and explain a bit about yourself and your background.
Sure thing. Well, I'm Caitlin McGilley. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. But I have been in the corporate sector for nearly 10 years now, in various roles, but I owe it all to my military service. So I entered the Navy right out of college in 2008 and became an intel officer. I spent my first year in training, but found myself in Afghanistan within the first 12 months. Unfortunately for my parents, they thought I was going to be able to avoid it. But I was so happy I went. I got to serve with the Joint Special Operations Command, and that really set me up in the special operations community for the rest of my career. So time in DC doing collections management, learning how to stay organized. And then my last 3 years was with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. And with that opportunity, I got to spend a lot of time in various agencies in DC. I lived in Yemen back and forth for 3 years and got to experience a whole new culture that most Americans don't ever get to see. And it was just a really amazing experience all around. And then I left to become an Army spouse. So I have seen both sides of this coin in the military world. And it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, I won't ask which way the family goes in the Army-Navy game. I guess it must be a bit of a split there on that one. I also love the fact that only the US Navy can send you on your first deployment to a landlocked country that you probably wouldn't have had in your top list of naval deployments. So I think all of us who know the military, your feelings on that one.
I've never been on a ship, which is really embarrassing. So,
well, there are a few of them there used to be, I guess. So rare opportunities. Bridget, how about yourself?
Well, Caitlin, I learned a lot about you in your intro that I didn't know. We'll have to catch up at OSAC more. I started my professional career as a Marine Corps officer. I started out as a communications officer and then joined an Army Special Mission Unit and started to work in the intelligence domain. So I completed my military experience and thought I was going to move into the private sector, and then 9/11 occurred and was recalled to active duty to support the Department of Homeland Security, believe it or not, to stand up an intel operations function there. So I worked at Department of Homeland Security for a few years, and then followed a spouse overseas and worked started a nonprofit for refugees and asylum seekers first supported Catholic nuns in Romania doing that. Then we moved to Turkey, and that's where I stood up my own nonprofit because there wasn't an entity like that there, and I knew the nuns would come after me if I didn't support them in Turkey. Moved back to the United States and continued in the nonprofit sphere for a little while before moving into, I created my own small security consulting company, and then later decided to go to the private sector where I have supported roles in Microsoft, GoDaddy, and now I'm at Viasat. And just to kind of round off that veteran or military veteran experience, I lead the Viasat Veterans Alliance at Viasat. We have over 600 veterans and allies from international military forces that are a part of our corporation. And then I also just last month completed the George W. Bush Foundation's Veteran Leadership Program. It's a fellowship supporting veterans and military families. So I look forward to talking about that today too.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bridget. got to be very embarrassed about my own military experience, which I'll come on to in a minute, thoroughly dwarfed it. Herb, how about yourself?
So I started out in the United States Navy. I spent a little over 9 years in the Navy. 3 of those years was as an intelligence analyst or an intelligence specialist. Then I went to Basic Underwater Demolition School, NSW, and became a SWCC, a Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman. Similar to Caitlin's journey, I was about 2 weeks out of NSW training when 9/11 occurred, and found myself doing containment and other types of missions in Uzbekistan, which it was a far cry from actually driving boats and doing insertions, which was kind of what we did. But it has led to a very interesting sort of career journey as a result of seeing sort of all the opportunities through the military, through NSW, engaging with different contractors while I was overseas in some odd places. I did finish my military career at Joint Special Operations Task Force Philippines. That was my last deployment. Shortly after getting out of the military and being honorably discharged, I was offered a train, advise, assist contract through a U.S. government contractor that then brought me into Africa, West Africa specifically, to do some train, advise, and assist of different nation states, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea at the time, in training up anti-militia forces. After that, it was really a short transition to what became an 11-year career in the defense sector with Lockheed Martin, where I spent most of my time in international and global security roles, as well as a short time again as an intelligence analyst. I 100%, as Caitlin mentioned, credit my military career with where I've been able to go in the security profession, as well as just being the foundation for the characteristics that have led me here. I've been in the commercial environment, purely commercial environment, since 2019, where I started out as a director of global safety and security for Marriott International, and then moved over about a year and a half, returning stateside to take a role as head of security for Sony Electronics.
Brilliant. Thanks, Herb. I'm definitely going to riff off that point you made there about the wider value that you brought. But I guess it's appropriate for me to talk about why I'm doing this myself. And I came out, 9/11 is a bit of a theme here. For me, it was the other way around. I'd always been a reservist. I went to university and joined the reserves at university because, frankly, I intended to join the regular army, to be honest. But it was mid-90s, not a huge amount going on with the regular army. But still, being in the reserves and getting paid to do that, beat working in Starbucks, if Starbucks was even a thing at the time. I'm sure it wasn't even around. Sadly, I'm dating myself. But it was great to do those things. I loved being stretched by learning how to be an officer one weekend and actually learning how to drive a tank on another weekend. And that was a great experience as a soldier in that time. And then Chase Manhattan at the time, which became JP Morgan not long afterwards, very kind enough to offer me a job as an M&A banker. And my then girlfriend thoroughly loved the idea of, instead of living in a married quarter in Germany or something like that, actually having a partner who was earning in the city. But I was pretty happy because I got to command tanks at the weekend and smash up the countryside, which was great. And I saw that adventure, which was definitely lacking behind a desk in the city of London. And then for me, 9/11 happened, and I went the other way, in some ways. So the day after 9/11, recognized the world had changed and went to my adjutant in my regiment at the time in the army and said, actually, I want to go full-time. And so I was given a place, unusual at the time for a reservist in the British Army to go and take the place of a regular that, to be honest, the army hadn't recruited. I went away with a regiment called the Queen's Royal Hussars and sent to Kosovo, did some other things, was taught Arabic and went to Iraq in 2003, 2004, in a role that wasn't intelligence because we were armour and we were ground holding. But I was very involved in what we were doing with local communities and supporting the operations that we were doing, which sort of took me in this world. And I've carried on doing that in one form or another all the way up to the current day. So thoroughly enjoyed having the blend of both and coming at it from a bit of a different direction. So, yeah, again, very close to my heart that we talk about this because I've seen the advantages of both actually being a civilian coming into the military and what I saw done differently, and then also the other way around. And effectively, I come in and out of that a number of times over the years. And for anyone who's thinking about that sort of service, actually, it's a very good way to do these things in the 21st century. It's kind of the military on your terms and civilian life with more excitement added. So I do also heartily recommend to everyone reserve life, because you get some of the bonhomie that I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later in this. But I want to come back to what Herb said, and Caitlin, you said it as well, so I'll probably pick on you first on this one. But I guess the skills, all of us are security professionals, we understand that. I mean, we know each other, that's why we're all on this call, but we all agree, I think, that the skills the military people bring, it's very one-dimensional to say we can do corporate security because we were in the military. As you say, you owe where you are now to that, but not just because you had a background in intelligence and other things, but I think there is a wider range of skills that veterans bring to businesses. So what did you find, when you came into the world of business, with the superpowers that you had that you may not have realized you had, or perhaps you did know you had them, but you were pleasantly surprised with just how effective they were?
So I think for me, I came right into the corporate world having the opportunity to lead, just as I did in the military, because you're right out of college, they throw you right in with folks, and it was a really interesting experience. But in the military, you're leading in really difficult environments, and you have a whole gamut of folks from different backgrounds, and you have to get them to work together as a team and focused on the mission. I think that is a huge part of the corporate world as well. People are coming from different places in their career, and you have to move them towards the end goal. And I think that was one of the biggest pieces that I picked up from the military that I brought into the corporate sector, was be able to get people to trust me and know that I had their best interests at heart. And I think that's another piece too, of like, when you're in the military, you're on a timeline for promotion. There's not really anything you can do. It's not self-serving. You're always serving the mission. And so bringing that mentality into the corporate world and focusing on that business growth, or, if your security team has a particular path they want to take, focus on that and not how it looks for you. And then your team follows you. And I think that's some of the core principles from when I was in the military that I like to, I brought over to this world. And it's been great. Really awesome teams. I'm so lucky for the teams that I had the privilege to serve on.
Well, we've worked with some of them, so I can certainly testify to that. And there's their feeling of morale and things I know you've injected over the years. But Bridget, how about yourself? You've done this, bewildering array of things, including running a non-profit for nuns, which I feel should be a non-profit, but I'm probably overdoing the joke. That was rather too obvious there. But you've done all these different things, obviously.
Only from you, Justin.
I know. Got to add something to this. But you've done all these different things. To what extent do you find yourself falling back on that sense of mission, purpose, and ability to get things done in complex environments that Caitlin just talked about there? Did that help you on that journey? Did you feel that, I can do this because of what I've done in the military, or was it, separate to that?
Yeah, I know. I think all of my experiences have contributed to, one, who I am today, and two, then how I do my job, on a daily basis, whether it be with my security teams or in the veteran space. And I really think that one of the things I would say is all of us have served in leadership positions, and we know that leadership, is not, you may have a title, but the secret is to create a sense of team and a sense of purpose, and the power of persuasion, not only within your team, but externally to, reach across and connect with other partners to get things done, is really the power. And if you don't have the trust of your team that you have their best interests in mind, and that you understand and keep that mission at the forefront, then you really will not be as effective, and you probably won't last in your role too long. Good communications to me are critical. I kind of over communicate at times, but I believe in just making sure all the different stakeholders up, down, and across, know what our objectives are, where we are, and where we're going. And, that team creating that sense of team and creating kind of a fun vibe while we're doing it is really important to me.
Yeah, I think we'll come back on to sense of humour, but certainly we say in the British Army, if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined, which gets deployed at various moments when it's pouring down with rain and things going badly wrong, and usually goes down resoundingly unwell with those in earshot at the time. But certainly, I think, again, when we're doing these complex tasks, I love what you say about communication, because I do think, particularly post-COVID, communication is definitely where a lot of businesses are falling over. And if they think they're agile, I think a lot of people say, well, we're agile, which is actually meaning we don't really have any processes and we just make things up as we go along, and we call it agility. And I think, actually, as we know, true agility from the battlefield or anything else comes from having good communications, from having really slick processes. And then that gives you the agility to operate flexibly and to achieve difficult things. I think it's something that inherently comes well to most veterans I've worked with. But, Herb, what have you found? I think you employ a number of veterans as well in your team, don't you?
I do. Like Bridget mentioned, one of the things that I've done since being here at Sony Electronics, and I was a part of it previously in my other organizations, was being a part of the Veterans Employee Network. And in this instance, with regard to Sony, I co-lead the ENET. So one of the focuses has been bringing more of that service member talent, veteran talent, into the corporate security team. We, of course, want an extremely diverse team with a lot of different backgrounds contributing. I always find that's best, but really when it comes to, I think it has to do with the way in which you're raised, for lack of a better term, in the military. Just that ability to motivate yourself, motivate others, really drive towards a common goal, and then innovate, being adaptable and flexible and changing the plan, not being married to it and being able to do whatever is necessary to kind of get the job done. In the units I served in, we were only 3 to 4 people teams on board each craft. So we could get split up, sent into different locations, and really you're only reliant on those 3 other people to do a myriad of things. So even if you didn't know a thing, even if you weren't trained to it and it was necessary, someone on the team would step up and say, hey, I'll figure out how to do this, how to get it done. And you would just get it done. And I think I brought all that into the corporate sector. And more specifically, it was that ability to kind of just take on a mission and not necessarily get as tired as quickly or as unfocused as quickly, or say, okay, I'm done for today and I'm going to leave it here and I'm going to go. I would just, finish and get to that goal where other employees weren't necessarily as dogged about that approach. And I think that got me a lot faster, a lot faster.
Justin, could I follow on, pull a thread on something Herb just said? Herb, I think you're talking about a word that we maybe use a little bit too much today in security. It was a new term a few years ago. It's now heavily used as that term resilience, but I really do believe in it. When you talk about getting things done and like persevering through fatigue and other things, I think that is a benefit that veterans bring, or ex-mil. Justin, I know a lot of our British partners, use the term ex-military as well, but I think that's a value that we bring to the table. And, my company in particular, we just went through a big acquisition of a UK-based company, Inmarsat. As you know, being an M&A professional before, mergers and acquisitions are difficult, and they take a few years, and they're rigorous, and they tire people out. And I feel like we pulled both of our veterans alliances together, and just through these relationships that we've started creating, I just feel like we've created this energy that keeps us going despite some of the challenges that we've had. So just wanted to follow on with something that Herb had just said.
No, that's a really...
Yeah, there was another piece. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Justin.
No, I was just saying it was a great point. Thank you.
But the other piece that Herb was talking about, like the creative solutioning, I think that, especially in the Navy, as, a fellow Navy person, we were often very under-resourced. Now, at DevGru, we were not, so I was very spoiled there. but most units in the military are under-resourced, and you have to figure it out with what you have. And I think that is definitely a through line with all veterans. Budgets are tough, especially in the U.S. And so you have what you have in front of you, and you have to accomplish the mission. And I've seen duct tape used in so many creative ways to get the job done, and it does. So I think that's like another really cool aspect of being a veteran. There's no, hey, we don't have what we need. It's, hey, we'll figure out how to do it with what we have, which I love.
It is grand, but I worry, and something occurs to me when we're saying all of this. It said we're resilient, we're uncomplaining, we'll do it with duct tape, we need to build a global satellite communications network. Here's some string and some duct tape, go and make it happen. I know if I gave it to the right NCO, we'd get something, even if it was just a tin can in orbit. And we're very good at creative problem solving and everything else. It does strike me, in the military, what we have to do is lives are at stake. We're all together. We're committed to that mission. And then you go into this corporate environment where potentially it's all about, did you get your B4s filled out by the end of the month or something, terribly arguably unexciting. And we are all lucky that we work in actually quite exciting parts of our businesses, let's be fair. But a lot of business is not desperately exciting. And so people have been motivated by these missions and things. And you come into this thing and you are uncomplaining. You'll take on the burden. If other people don't do it, you'll do it. You are self-reliant. Is there a real risk here to veterans? I know we have to touch on the ghastly issue of veteran suicides in all countries, which are horrific. And to what extent, partly, does the very thing that's most successful for veterans, that brings the most, actually, in a way, become our weakness that we take on far too much? I know I've got people on my own team who will die in a ditch to get things done and not complain, and that's something I'm very concerned about. Bridget?
Yeah, I think as leaders, it's our responsibility to really understand and develop strengths in evaluating risk and presenting risks up in order to help prioritize what must be done. So I think we need to make sure that we do everything that needs to be done to mitigate the biggest risks. And then we also need to be strong enough leaders to say, we simply don't have the resources right now to do these three things, which we believe are lower risk. So we will address them after we mitigate this big risk. And I think that's the way we can protect our teams from burnout, because I do think that what you highlight is potentially true if we're not careful.
Yeah. Caitlin, Herb, have either of you had issues where you felt that actually these good assets of yours, and you actually sort of sat there slightly and felt, I'm feeling a bit taken advantage of here in this business?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things we'd previously talked about was, the ability to detach yourself from emotion so you can think critically and make decisions in an unbiased way. And this is a superpower that we have. But if you detach yourself emotionally for too long, you're disassociated. You're not connecting with your people. You're not connecting with your family. And that can really cause a rift. And I will say, from all of my veteran colleagues that I've worked with over the years, we bond really strongly, and we have the dark humor, and we find these ways to get through it. But there is this sort of disconnection with some of the humanity sometimes, I think, that happens. And so, anybody who's worked with me, I'm a huge proponent of mental health, and, going to talk to somebody, taking that time off, and truly disconnecting from, your phone, so you're not getting those crazy calls in the middle of the night. And you have to be there for your folks and force them to do that. Because none of us, I'm sure none of us here would actively make that decision. Somebody has to tell us, no, this is take the week off. So, as a leader, you really have to push folks into that, because we will all get ourselves lost in all of this work, because it feels really important, and we feel like we get to serve, our folks. So, yeah, it's a huge challenge.
Clay, how about you?
I think for me, it took about 6 years for me to finally sort of understand the impacts of burnout. My 6 years in the boat teams, I did back-to-back deployments. So I do, anywhere from 6 to 8 months deployed, come back, do a quick workup, and I would jump right back into a deployment cycle. And it was actually my wife at the time who said, there was 2 deployments to Iraq, and then I finished up at Jasota P, and they wanted to send me right back out. And my wife just kind of looked at me and said, no, you have to be done. And I thought, because I was done with the service, that would be something that just kind of, okay, that was associated with the service, that level of drive and that level of, wanting to be there with my teammates. But it was about that 6 years into my commercial career, for lack of a better term, with Lockheed. And I was on now my 4th deployment in a very short period of time, this time to Afghanistan. And my wife turned around and said the same thing. She said, look, you got out of the military because you were going back-to-back deployments. Here you are at Lockheed, and you're just hopping from Iraq back to Afghanistan and so on and so forth. And it's taking a toll, right, on my health. If I'd have known that was the case, I should have just finished out my service for another 10 years, if that was the plan. And, it took some time to reflect and sit back. And I sat with my manager at the time, and he said, Clay, listen, on the commercial, the defense side of this, the defense contractor side, they will deploy you as much as you want. You're never going to make any more money. You're never going to be recognized any more than you already have been for this, for your contributions. At some point, you have to be the one to kind of pull the reins back on things. So between those 2 conversations, I really did start to understand that it had to be a personal choice, and I had to have the self-awareness to kind of refocus myself when I started to get into those cycles of deployment. And what that's done for me today, I have a number of service members working for me. And, we can go from, supporting events and trade shows to, doing flyaways, to supporting EP missions down in Mexico. And particularly my folks that have come from the military, they will start to jump from one to the other. And I've had to put sort of hard and fast rules in place that, hey, if you're just coming off of one, you have to have at least a 2-week layoff before you go on that next mission. Spend time with family. Don't come into the office. Do the things necessary. And I spent a lot of time coaching them about the things that I struggled with as it related to sort of that level of burnout and just not really being connected the way that I should. With those other things that always matter, family, friends, those things that help sustain us and help us build that resiliency in terms of our character and the other things that matter.
I think it's interesting because within the military environment, normally, that you are intense for periods of time. You'd be intense training, everything else, but there's a mission, there's a target. And of course, the missions change, the targets change, and you eventually win the war, you win the battle, you win the objectives. All your tour is over. At least you got to the end of the tour, whatever it is, and that mission alters. And I think eventually realize in civilian life, the mission isn't always really, that dynamic. Again, we are very lucky, I think, and working in the security industry, because we do get to do more interesting things still. But it's not quite the same mission, is it? It is often a case of life or death, but not as much as maybe people would believe from the outside. Again, we're more preserving profits and stable business operations necessarily than racing in to save people's lives, though I know all of us have dealt with events where people's lives were saved as a result of insight. And of course, I guess we never get to know the events that we saved from the intelligence side by giving people enough warning they didn't go on a trip that would have been very dangerous had they gone. So, who knows, what value we've had. But I think it is true that, setting those challenges sometimes in the corporate world, I think can languish a bit. You can burn yourself out achieving slightly meaningless objectives sometimes, I think. So you say maintaining the balance is key. And the sense of, as we've all said, I will ask you, and don't feel you have to answer because the silence will be just telling. Has anyone had any faux pas with military humour after leaving and once you entered the civilian workplace, or were you all extremely well behaved? Yeah.
For me personally, I have always found I can't think of any faux pas, but I have always surrounded myself with a lot of veterans. I usually find my little group, and it's like a safe space. And there are times where we have to police each other, like bro, you can't say that. There's a lot of those comments. But yeah, both at JP Morgan and at Netflix, our veteran communities were really strong. Netflix. It was called Vetflix, which, I always love a good little pun. And yeah, so there was a lot of, it was almost like therapy every time we got together, and you didn't have to watch your back and stuff. So, but yeah, I've avoided anything too serious.
I'm not owning up to mine, but I'm sure my team will tell you some of them over a drink. But Bridget, I know you were saying as well, I mean, you've worked on in fact, all of you obviously worked on the veterans group, so I think is excellent. What have you found the biggest value of those to be, and what tips would you give to anyone that actually is looking at setting one up in their own firm?
I would say that one, there a lot of us, when we leave the military, we're excited about trying out, employment in the private sector, and then pretty soon thereafter we feel a sense of loss, of community, of identity, maybe. Maybe we're starting out in a role that's a little bit lower tiered than the job we were doing before. There's a lot of things, you're spending more time with your family. There are a lot of things that cause like this disequilibrium. And if a company has a veterans organization, it's a great place to go just for the thing that Caitlin just said. It's your gang. It's like, you can F-bomb it. You can, throw fairly inappropriate jokes, and you can make fun of each other. You can, whether it's virtually or physically, you just have that, you can create that feeling again, that you feel like you may have lost, even if it's just temporary, and it kind of keeps you going. If you don't have a veterans organization at your company, I would say that the value prop is go to your corporate social responsibility team or your DEI team and tell them that the value that, they can promote your organization. And in the end, you reach your objective, which is creating community with your people. So I think most companies would be really open to creating them if they don't have them. And I think the value to our veterans is great. Our mission is to create community within, and then to go do good things for veterans and military families outside of our company. So it's kind of a twofold mission, and just makes us feel good. We're serving.
I mean, here's a great point. Military families, they go through a lot. I mean, I think, your poor wife, throughout that whole story, as you say, I hope she recognized you when you got back, and she saw you once every 12 months or so from the sound of it. We all actually know that training pre-deployment is as intense as being on deployment. So you come home, train for another 12 months, you're away, and then you come back and you're away for 12 months. And, it's a horrendous experience, isn't it? And I think probably actually a lot of military spouses might not be very visible to us in our organizations necessarily, because we're not asking everyone, hey, what does your spouse do? Are they a service person? I don't think we do that. So, do we do enough for spouses? And Bridget, I know that you've certainly talked about this before with me, but do we do enough? Especially when you were saying you're working for Lockheed and stuff, and you're away all the time. What was the family doing for your spouse? Because I guarantee probably very little, right? Not picking on Lockheed, it's just that businesses generally don't.
Right. And you're 100% correct. I think we're getting better as a community of developing resources for spouses and different organizations and nonprofits that we see popping up that are focused that way. And I think the military in and of itself is doing a lot more to try and encourage different resources for spouses. But as companies, we do lag behind. And Bridget, I certainly took a note, because that isn't a focus of ours in our ENET. We have a lot of spouses of military active right now, or veteran in the group, but we don't necessarily have that focus in terms of asking them what they need and how we can help. And I think we need to be a bit more deliberate about that. So that's definitely a note I've taken away. And I think it's just a matter of giving that visibility across the different organizations, the different service organizations that shed a light on this, that, the families are as equally as serving in the same way or in a similar way as the military service member. And I think that just needs to remain a highlight. I would say that for my wife, luckily she comes from a very resilient family. She's from Portugal. her father was a sailor as well, not in the military, but sailed across Africa as well as Portugal, fishing, doing things like that. So he was away. But that developed in her a pretty strong resilience and an understanding of kind of what I did. So she came in with a bit of a baseline that others don't have. But I think what I've seen primarily from her is that additional desire to kind of build that resilience in terms of, how she's grown, developed, otherwise skilled herself, so that when I am away, I hate to say it's like I'm not even away because she does everything, but effectively that's what it came down to, is she was able to do anything that she might necessarily have me do while I was there. And I appreciate what she's done, but I know that there are a lot of spouses out there that still need that learning, that growth, that development, and even the lessons learned from other spouses.
Right.
Yeah.
Caitlin, go ahead.
No, go ahead after you, Bridget.
Yeah, I was going to say that my eyes were really opened over the last 5 months at the George W. Bush Institute's Veteran Leadership Program. That's a mouthful. But at our VLP program, where there were 34 of us in a cohort, and a good percentage of them this year were military spouses. And so they really brought forward the plight, I'll call it, of the military spouse. There are so many highly educated, capable military spouses who, while we're serving, are not able to maintain and build their career. Their career kind of may start and stop, or they may just give up because things get too challenging, and they're maintaining, as Herb says, the house and everything while the spouse is deployed. And yet they are so highly capable. I do think the military is taking some great steps to support spouses in holding, in pursuing careers. And it is actually a reason why many military members leave, is that their spouse hasn't had an opportunity to achieve their goals. So I do think it's important. We host at Viasat a transition event each year for just one day for 50 transitioning military veterans. That was what we used to do. 2 years ago, we started. It's for military transitioning veterans and mil spouses now. And they come in and they spend an entire day. It's exhausting. It's amazing. And many of them, in the exit survey that we give, they say that this was the most beneficial day that they had to understand how they need to prepare to be successful in the private sector. And I'm so proud that we have military spouses in there now who are finding out how to be competitive for that next job. As one of my friends who runs a nonprofit called It's My Turn, says, hey, look, they're done. It's my turn now. So I think, we want to be aware of that. And there's a lot of capacity there and a lot of energy and enthusiasm. So if you want a good employee, I'd look for them.
It's my turn. We'll make sure we input.
I strongly.
And then go ahead.
Oh, that's a great idea. No, Bridget, it's such a great point. Like the military, I love that the military is putting in effort, and it's amazing to hear that your company is going out and actually putting in the effort, because I really see the effort has to come from the private sector, because the military can do all the things, but if you don't have these businesses that are supportive to the spouses, then there's not going to be any meaningful jobs really at the end of the day. I love talking about my wife and the fact that we were dual military, but we couldn't make our career work. And I was so upset. I thought I was going to be in the Navy for 30 years. I was going to be an admiral. I loved it. But they wouldn't let me take a knee for 2 years. And kind of take a little bit of a rest, which I desperately needed. So I got out. And when I interviewed with JP Morgan Chase, I told them during my first interview that I could only work there for 3 years. It's like, you have me for 3 years. I'll work super hard. But my wife will get orders and I'll have to leave New York. And they were like, okay, thanks for being, upfront. And I ended up getting the job, and I was, I had an amazing experience there. And thankfully, our leader at the time was a veteran. And when my wife got orders to Germany, I was like, hey guys, I have to leave. I'm going to have to, find a new job. Hopefully I can find something in Europe. And he transferred me to our Frankfurt office, and I worked remotely. And that set me up for the rest of my career. I would have had to kind of pivoted too early to a new company. I still had a lot to, I wanted to accomplish. But all businesses can do that. And I think seeing what we went through with COVID, how it's so easy to work remotely, like let our spouses do that. Let these mill spouses take their jobs with them as they move around the country, move around the world, because they're still, they can juggle it. It's really impressive what folks can do. And I had that privilege of every time our kid was sick, I was home all day with the kid. My wife would get home from work and I would go work New York hours. And so we can really do it all as mill spouses. So yeah, give folks the opportunity, and every business, that there's a huge return on that. Strongly recommend it.
I'm going to come back on a few of the points we've had there in a bit, but it did make me think straight away, about what we've been talking through in all of this, which is notion of service, others before self, mission before others, etc., and all these things. I mean, do you feel, I know everyone's take this one first, but do we feel that service is actually valued in today's society? Fling that hot potato out there and see.
I mean, I think I feel that many value it, but there are fewer and fewer who've served, and there are fewer and fewer who are connected to people who have served. So I think that there's a curiosity at times, and I think, once you engage in conversation and it opens some doors, I think that many people that I've met have, they see the value and then they appreciate the value. But, I work in the defense industry now, but I didn't before. And so I really feel it now, but I also felt it before. I think we just have to, and I also think it's about, there's a lot of focus, and it's really important on mental health and veterans' mental health. And that's very important, but it can't be the only, part of the dialogue. We have to also promote the incredible strengths and skills that veterans bring to the table. So I think that if we keep those, if we bring all the right conversations into the light, people will continue to see the value veterans bring.
Yeah. Okay. Service, fashionable or unfashionable at the moment? Notion of service.
I think. So I have, the history of seeing my father as a Vietnam era veteran and the way he was treated. And then having the experience myself. And fortunately, my niece, she has raised her hand to serve in the Army Reserve most recently, and has gotten her own sort of recognition and acknowledgement of her service. And I think we continue to get better at it. But I think the thing that we fight here, at least in the United States, is sort of that very short memory that we seem to have, right? So during the holidays and during different parts of the year, you see that sort of support kind of, really peak, and then it goes away. Or if there's an incident or an event that involves the military, you see that again sort of peak, and then it goes away. And I think if we could just develop some more consistency, with which we kind of recognize and support our military and veterans throughout the year, you probably see that kind of continue to grow and develop, and to where, when my niece gets out of the service, then, she'll probably feel as though it's 10 times better as what it was when I was in the service, which is what I'm hoping for. But I think it's the consistency that we don't do a great job at.
Yeah. Yeah. So veterans are for life, not just for November. I think it's kind of something I think we're definitely coming to, I think, within all this. And yes, it's something that bothers me on the service side. And Caitlin McGilley, I haven't sort of asked you on this one, but I do feel it's sort of dropping off. And we all mentioned 9/11, and I think I have people working for me now who weren't even born then. I've had people who don't remember it. You know, and you go to people and say, I found a source here from 1998. Can I use that for something I'm using? You know, and it's like it's from the last century, you know, and suddenly feels slightly old. And I think, as you mentioned, those peaks and troughs of events, of course, 9/11 happened, defined us probably 10 years, you know, I think pretty firmly that it was seen as something, and then it sort of fades off. And then, of course, there's a legacy of failure in these operations. And I think, you know, we don't have a thing at the moment, of course, you know, warfare is bad, military equals bad, military people equal bad people sometimes, you know, out there, sort of forgetting the flip side of the equation, which is the people that are the most active in pushing that message are our country's adversaries, usually, to try and say that, you know, our military is a bad thing. Because I think, certainly I felt that my military service, we were a force for good. I wouldn't say we always got it right, but we certainly all felt that we were doing the right things. And we were trying to do things for the right reasons. But you know, I've been fascinated with the reaction I've got from some people about the fact that I served in the military at all. They thought it was terribly old-fashioned, you know, even in the UK. And then very horrendous stats. So certainly here, the prison population is greater than the size of the regular army. So people are more likely to have a family member in prison than in the army, straight away in that system. And also the fact, as we know, I mean, you join the military generally nowadays because you've got a family connection to it, so you understand it. You know, of course, and as that population diminishes, there's less and less people who will join because there's less and less exposure to it, and it's become very misunderstood, I think. So I think service is still applauded in isolation, but it's sort of, we're given a society that's a little bit less rewarding. But Hub, to your great point about your niece, I mean, fantastic. She's joined again. She's got that family connection. She understands it. I think it is good looking forward, because I think all of us say, well, I mean, it's not like it was for our generation, right? We were the great ones. Kids nowadays just can't hack it. And I know that when you look back at, you know, the last generations that were in Afghanistan and things like that, they did a pretty good job, just the same as the rest of us at our various times. So I think people will always step up, and we can sort of talk ourselves, I guess, out of the idea that people still value service, but there are people like me, so stepping up and still doing it and getting a lot out of it. And, you know, again, as we all hope, bringing those skills forward to business. I guess now something else we touched on there, though, you know, advice to veterans. And Bridget, I know you said that, you know, you've been part of these forums that are giving advice and everything else like that. I'm just going to ask you, you know, what's your top piece of advice for veterans entering the private sector? And Bridget, I'll start with you.
Well, I'd like to focus on enlisted members in my points. I think I was an officer, and I think it's fairly easy for us to transition to a corporate role. My son is serving. He's a corporal in the Marines, infantryman. I'm so proud of him. And he's just signed up for 6 more years, so he'll be in for a while. But when he prepares to get out, I want him to know his value, and I want him to be able to articulate his value, because I think that value, I think that there's not an emphasis, you know, some of our senior enlisted are so busy doing their job and focusing on the mission all the time that they're not thinking of how to promote themselves in the private sector or in other domains. So I have a friend from this last cohort, just last month too, who is a senior enlisted Air Force retiree and runs this company called Courageous Leadership Alliance. I hope we can put it in the show notes. And he teaches senior enlisted how to promote their value. And I just think that I would encourage senior enlisted or mid-grade enlisted members to really go out there and find the resources that can help them to launch into the role that they need without losing momentum. So that's kind of what I'd like to pass on.
Yeah, so that ability to really explain that value, I hope we've touched on here, and people listening, it's sort of heard come through. I mean, it's not the military skill, the hard security skills or anything else. It's so you say, getting things done in complex environments, you know, taking responsibility, taking ownership, you know, solving problems, dynamic. These are all things that any employer sound like should be tripping over. You see enlisted often the very worst at explaining it because they're used to operating within a structure. And actually, I've got some really, really great people on my team who are enlisted, who I found as GSOC operators, you know, and came to me when we took over a contract quite often. And you see these people, you go, you've got amazing skills to be more. And they're, well, I haven't got a master's degree. Yeah, so I just don't feel I can really proceed in the intelligence security arena in business. And I said, rubbish. You know, that's a way of someone getting in. You can show your worth, and we can teach you the rest. And one of them's gone on to be quite a senior manager, running a team of strategic analysts for a client, doing a great job. And, you know, that's within 4 years with us. And yeah, he was enlisted, came out and just being a GSOC operator, and that was his horizon, I think, really. Felt like I could become a slightly more senior operator, but I'm an operator. That's my mentality because I'm enlisted almost. So it's really great to bring him on and say, actually, yeah, you're outside those confines now. You can't say, well, it's an officer's sport to be an analyst because you've got to have a master's, and it's been great to watch him go on. He's one of several, so I really hear that. Caitlin, how about yourself? Advice to veterans, top tip.
I think the key is to find your community outside of the military. So much of our identity, as we already talked about, is so wrapped up in that service and who you are as a soldier or sailor, or whatever it might be. It is a really tough transition. I think we all touched on it. Took me 2 years to feel comfortable in my own skin. And what helped with that is when I became a volunteer firefighter. So I sort of found a new way to serve my community in a very small local way. But joining sports teams, having really healthy hobbies that you can then pour yourself into outside of work, because we're so used to that lifestyle. So you really have to find healthy outlets to kind of, not to reintegrate, but in a way, reintegrate into society, because we're just so used to moving around all the time and not really planning routes any one place. So get into your community, find those healthy activities, and that really does help, the sort of sting of losing that previous identity.
Brilliant, thanks. Herb, how about yourself?
Well, actually, I think Caitlin and Bridget both pointed out probably the most critical things you can do. And for me, in my transition out of service, I became a part of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, a veteran service organization, and have been, really active in giving back to the community. But also, as Caitlin mentioned, those type of opportunities are that safe space to commune with people who come from similar backgrounds and understand sort of your language and things like that. And then to Bridget's point, which I think is tremendous because I still struggle with it. I was senior enlisted as an E6, FROC 2 E7 chief when I got out. And the challenge I had and have always had is getting into that room. For example, one of the leaders I had at Lockheed was Bob Harwood, who was an admiral. And every time I stepped into his office, I was still either acting like a first class or a chief, and didn't believe within that space that I understood how to have that type of conversation to really influence someone of his experience and someone of his pedigree. Because in the military, I wouldn't, right? I would just get those marching orders and do what was necessary. So I think to Bridget's point, having a mentor, having a group, an organization that helps enlisted, whether they be senior enlisted or junior enlisted, understand sort of the nuance of their new environment and how to kind of bridge that gap now that they have the opportunity to shoot for certain roles and be in certain positions that might be typically fielded by what we would view as officers is absolutely critical because I think had I had that very early on, it would have reshaped some of the opportunities that I saw and were bold enough to go after. I spent a long time in that operator space, and I probably could have, navigated to some other opportunities had I had that level of coaching and mentorship. So I really appreciate that Bridget brought that up and agree.
Yeah, can you offer one more thing to Justin? I'd also encourage people to do something completely different. To Caitlin's point, in your hobby or your free time, like learn to ride a motorcycle or start playing violin or learn to bake, and it could be with a club or it could be by yourself or it could be with your family. But I just see too many people just trying to recreate and I want to build community for our veterans so we have a safe space, but I want us to go, we need to go out and do new things. And so I encourage veterans too to just try something crazy that you are not comfortable with and not good at all. and you might just suck at it for a while when you as you start. But it's good for your brain, and it's good for your body, and it's good for your future.
I'm just envisaging the ex-Special Forces Special Baking Society that's busy making a barrage deal. Particularly aggressive cupcakes. And
it's a new business for you, Justin.
Always go, innovation is one of those things we learn, isn't it? Improvise, adapt, and overcome. Yeah. No, I absolutely love it. I couldn't agree more. I mean, actually, for me, okay, it's a bit of a bad example because I've kept the reserves as my hobby as well. But then I've always done it because I quite like not quite being in either camp, which means I can be sardonic to both and sort of generally irritating, I guess, to people. But it's funny enough, I guess I've always therefore had that thing because I was able to be, of the military and yet actually able to proclaim myself a civilian when I felt like it and therefore ignore the rules, frankly. I'll be honest, it's exactly what I did. And apologies to all of my former commanding officers over about 25 years for doing that. I knew exactly what I was doing the whole time. You were right. But also, I can be sort of more military than my civilian side. And funny, the effect is out on the business as well. So I've certainly managed to keep the balance by doing both. And effectively, it's allowed me to be a civilian on my terms, but still have value of service with what I do on my military side. And then actually be a military person, but sort of feel like I'm not institutionalized because I've got my civilian life. And it's worked very well for me, and so I recommend it. But on top of that, I think when I finished commanding tanks in the reserve, every time I finish commanding tanks, I think I'm never going to get to do it again. And I get to do it again, and it's sweet. But again, you never get to do that in civilian life. But when I finished what I think probably is really the last time this time, I took up flying, which I'd long wanted to do, because actually I found it a great similar challenge in terms of navigating, using a radio, caring for your equipment, and it was all the best things of that, whilst being utterly unmilitary, in that sort of way at all. And it filled exactly that niche for me, because I was needed something that was a bit more adventurous. I loved having the radio on and the crew interaction that you get in an armoured vehicle and things. And, I could have that with passengers going fun places and having a very expensive hamburger for lunch. And, that was my thing. So it absolutely resonated with me. And I fully acknowledged at the time, I was saying, well, now I've got some free time, having finished, a fairly busy reserve job. Actually, okay, I'm going to go do this thing I've always wanted to do. And it absolutely helped me, no end. And I felt like I still was doing something a bit more interesting than the day job. Because the great thing is, I think came across from what you all said, is we got to do some really extraordinarily fun things in the military. And also you do an awful lot of incredibly boring, dull, tedious things in the military. But I think the high points really are high points. And the team you have and the way you bond with people under pressure like that is very hard, to replicate. And you need something. You can't just come off that, I find. And I think that's a great piece of advice. It doesn't need to be something else military or even service orientated. So it's community. It's finding that community. And I think that's certainly where I've helped a few people find their way in business, but actually just a few veterans generally adapting to, life from when they joined at 17 or 18 to when they leave at 40, and, life sort of passing by a bit. So I love all that. I know we're coming towards the end of time. I'll just ask you, I think, for one very quick fire round, which is, so you're stuck in a lift with the CEO of the company and you've got one opportunity to convince them to hire veterans. What's your line? And Caitlin, I'll pick on you first.
Yeah. I would say our flexibility. We can pivot on a dime, and businesses these days, the market is volatile. We're coming into, big election coming up. It's going to get crazy in the next few months, and veterans know how to pivot. We know how to adjust. So point us in a direction and we'll get it done. Love it.
Yeah. So you want veterans around you because we've got an election coming up. We don't know where it's going to go. You want to have combat experience. It's always saying, yeah.
That's a whole other thing. Whole different podcast.
Not sure exactly when this will go out. So, that may be behind the times, in which case commiserations. Bridget, how about yourself? And you've probably done this. I mean, this is easy. Well, you've done it at least 3 times.
Yeah, no, but I'd say Caitlin stole my spiel. I mean, it's, if you have the opportunity to have that moment, I would just say that, when times are when the economy is faltering or when the business is going through challenges, the veterans in this organization are going to bond together, pick up the slack, drive on, and motivate others to just continue to push through to better days. And that's it's as simple as that.
Brilliant. And Herb, yeah, it's hardest going last because you've had all the good points stolen, of course, never do. But then you've had longer to think. So.
All right, so this better be genius, is what you're saying. I think for me, my go-to is always that if you want a Swiss Army knife, a person who is a Swiss Army knife, or a jack of all trades, master of none, you can't do any better than a military service member or veteran. We're that adaptable and that flexible. We can be thrown into most situations and just figure it out. And I know on my team, in specific terms, as it relates to those folks who can wear 4 or 5 different hats and sort of seamlessly move from one vertical or discipline to the next, those are almost always my veterans, the folks that I can take from physical security and move into executive protection, or take them from executive protection, move them in intel. They have that capacity, and they understand that the mission is what's most important, so they will adapt. It's not, well, I don't want to do that, I don't like that. There's, okay, no problem, I'll figure it out and get the job done. So that's typically what I rely on as my go-to, is if you want a person who will wear 4 or 5 different hats for you, and we're going to get our largest bang for our buck, that's what we need to invest in.
It always reminds me, I occasionally have thought about in my time in business, and I sat there and thought, no one was sitting in a hole in the ground in Afghanistan or Iraq or somewhere like that, and like trying to phone HR and complaining about a toxic work environment, sort of hostile attitude, in the workplace. Because you just have to get stuff done. Not that I've obviously ever experienced that, and I hasten to add that there's certainly not like we've ever had in my company. So before anyone tries to jump on me for that one, but it is you just don't get to do those things. You have to find your way through things, and you have to deal with problems, and often no one else is coming to help you. So I think that's great, and I think those are great points to end on. Thank you all for taking part in the discussion. Caitlin, Bridget, I'm so grateful for you taking time to go this. I think we've just scratched the surface, really. I think we all know what veterans can bring and the advantage, but I hope it's given those listening some taste of those sorts of things. And I will finish by apologising. I am very aware that we failed completely on DEI because we have no representation from any Air Force on this, or indeed Space Command for those countries lucky enough to have one. I promise you we will correct this next year. And if you are a member of an Air Force who has been offended by any part of this message, then you know where to find me, and I do deeply apologise. But to all the rest of you, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for listening. And if you have any thoughts about any of this, please explore the links. Please do comment. We'd love to hear your views and how any of you may have got on either employing veterans or being veterans in this world. Thank you very much.